The Bible you know contains 66 books in Protestant tradition, 73 in Catholic, 81 in Ethiopian Orthodox. But that's not the full story. Between the 4th and 7th centuries, church councils systematically removed entire texts, chapters, and books from the biblical canon. Some were deemed heretical. Others were considered too dangerous for public knowledge. The rest simply vanished into archives, buried under centuries of silence. But here's the thing. Silence doesn't mean gone. And in the last 2 decades, scientists have developed technology capable of reading texts that were burned, erased, or hidden so thoroughly that scholars believed they were lost forever. What they found in these restored chapters isn't comforting. It's not reassuring. It's deeply, fundamentally unsettling. And it's forcing theologians and historians to reconsider everything the Bible was supposed to represent. Lock your doors, turn up your volume, because after this video, you'll never read Scripture the same way again. In 2012, researchers at the Bavarian State Library in Munich began using multispectral imaging to examine ancient biblical manuscripts. The technology works by capturing images in different wavelengths of light, revealing text that's invisible to the naked eye. One manuscript they examined was Codex 1086, a 9th century Greek New Testament. On the surface it appeared to be a standard gospel text. Beneath the visible ink, they found something else entirely. Erased passages, deliberately removed and overwritten. The process is called palimpsest, where old text is scraped off parchment so the material can be reused. Expensive parchment meant manuscripts were often recycled, especially during the Middle Ages when resources were scarce. But what researchers found in Codex 1086 wasn't recycled by accident. It was intentionally erased. The hidden text contained passages attributed to the Gospel of Mark, but they didn't match any known version. These verses described events after the resurrection that canonical Mark doesn't include. Verses where Jesus speaks about the 7 who walk unseen and the watchers who remained. Verses describing a second group of disciples, ones who were not named, who were tasked with preserving knowledge until the appointed time. When Dr. Klaus Hermann, the lead researcher, presented the findings at an academic conference in 2014, the response was immediate and hostile. Theologians dismissed the text as apocryphal. The Vatican declined to comment. And within months, Dr. Hermann's research funding was cut without explanation. The restored passages were published in an obscure academic journal that ceased publication 2 years later. The findings were never widely distributed, but others had already started looking like. Because if one manuscript contained hidden text, how many others did too? The answer is hundreds. In 2015, the Israel Antiquities Authority announced the discovery of previously unknown fragments of the Dead Sea Scrolls. These weren't newly excavated. They were hidden in plain sight, inside scroll jars that had been cataloged decades earlier, but never fully examined. Using advanced infrared imaging, researchers found text on fragments that appeared blank to the naked eye. One fragment, labeled 4Q534, contained text referencing the Book of the Giants and the Sons of Heaven who took daughters of men. This matched passages found in the Book of Enoch, an ancient Jewish text excluded from most biblical canons but preserved in Ethiopian Orthodox tradition. The Book of Enoch describes fallen angels, forbidden knowledge, and a period before the flood when beings called Watchers taught humanity secrets they weren't meant to know. The fragment went further. It described a second fall, one that occurred after the resurrection, when 7 remained behind to guard what was sealed. It mentioned locations, specific mountains in modern-day Turkey and Armenia, where the knowledge of the first creation is preserved in stone and fire. The fragment was dated to approximately 5070 CE, placing it within the lifetimes of Jesus' apostles. That makes it one of the earliest Christian-era texts ever discovered, and it suggests that early Christians believed in things the modern church has spent centuries denying. Dr. Eshbal Ratson, one of the lead researchers, published preliminary findings in 2017. She noted that the text challenges traditional interpretations of early Christian cosmology. Within a year, access to the fragment was restricted. Official photographs were removed from public databases, and Dr. Ratzon's subsequent research focused on less controversial subjects. The fragment is now stored in a climate-controlled vault in Jerusalem. Access requires special permission from both the Israel Antiquities Authority and the Custody of the Holy Land, the Franciscan order that oversees Christian holy sites in the region. To date, fewer than 20 scholars have been granted access. None have published follow-up studies. So what's in the text that requires this level of control? What knowledge did early Christians preserve that modern institutions don't want discussed? In 2018, the Vatican Library digitized thousands of manuscripts as part of a broader effort to preserve historical documents. Among the digitized texts was a 5th century Latin codex known as Codex Vaticanus Latinus 39. It contained familiar passages from the Gospel of Matthew and the Book of Acts. But embedded within the standard text were annotations, marginal notes written in a different hand, likely added in the 6th or 7th century. The notes referenced chapters that no longer exist, specific verse numbers in books that are now shorter than they were in early manuscripts. One annotation read, Chapter 29 removed by order of council. Content deemed incompatible with doctrine established 381 CCE. The Council of Constantinople, in 381 CE, was one of the most significant early Christian gatherings, where key doctrines about the nature of Christ and the Trinity were formalized. But the council also made decisions about which texts were considered divinely inspired and which were not. This marginal note suggests that entire chapters were removed, not because they were inaccurate, but because they contradicted theological positions the Church wanted to establish. Researchers cross-referenced the annotation with other early manuscripts. They found matching gaps. Verses in some copies of Matthew that jump from verse 27 directly to verse 33, with no explanation for the missing content. Chapters in Acts that ended abruptly, mid-sentence, as if something had been cut out. Using comparative analysis, scholars reconstructed fragments of what the missing content likely contained. The results were startling. One removed section from Acts described Paul encountering figures of light who spoke in tongues unknown to men during his journey to Damascus. Not angels, not visions. Physical beings who gave him instructions about hidden texts that were to be preserved in the mountains beyond the empire's reach. The passage suggested Paul's mission wasn't just to spread Christianity, but to safeguard knowledge the early church feared. Another removed section from Matthew contained teachings attributed to Jesus about the watchers who fell and those who remain. It described a cosmology where humanity was not the first creation, and the world we inhabit is the second attempt, after the first was sealed beneath water and stone. This isn't fringe scholarship. These reconstructions are based on linguistic patterns, cross-references with other ancient texts, and gaps in manuscripts that scholars have known about for decades, but never fully investigated. The work has been published in peer-reviewed journals, but it's rarely discussed outside academic circles, and major religious institutions refuse to engage with the findings publicly. Why? Because if these chapters were part of the original Bible, if they were removed intentionally, then the Bible, as we know it today, is incomplete. And if it's incomplete, every doctrine built on its supposed totality becomes questionable. In 2020, researchers at the British Library used a technique called X-ray fluorescence imaging to examine Codex Sinaiticus, one of the oldest surviving Christian Bibles, dated to the 4th century. The Codex is famous for being one of the most complete early biblical manuscripts, but the imaging revealed something no one expected: evidence of systematic erasure. Entire pages had been scraped, rewritten, and rebound. The erased text was older than the visible text, meaning the codex had been edited after its creation. Researchers were able to recover fragments of the original writing. What they found didn't match the canonical Bible. One recovered section came from a text labeled The Apocalypse of Peter, a work that was widely read in early Christian communities, but excluded from the final biblical canon. The recovered verses described a vision Peter had after the resurrection, where he was shown the 7 seals that bind the depths, and warned that when the seals are broken, the watchers will return. And the world will know what was forgotten. The text referenced locations, specific geographic coordinates. One verse described a mountain where the sky touches stone, and beneath it, a door that cannot be opened by man. Scholars have attempted to match these descriptions with real locations. The most compelling match is Mount Ararat in eastern Turkey, the traditional landing place of Noah's Ark. Archaeological surveys of Mount Ararat have been restricted since the 1980s. The Turkish government rarely grants permits for excavation, and the few teams that have been allowed access report unusual challenges, equipment failures, sudden weather changes, and the persistent sense that something beneath the mountain doesn't want to be disturbed. In 1987, a joint Turkish-American expedition discovered anomalous ground-penetrating radar readings near the mountain's summit. The readings suggested a large hollow chamber approximately 40 meters below the surface. The team attempted to drill core samples. Every drill bit broke within minutes. The project was abandoned, and no follow-up expeditions have been authorized. Could this be the door that cannot be opened described in the Apocalypse of Peter? Is there something beneath Mount Ararat that early Christians knew about? Something they felt was too dangerous to leave in Scripture? Here's what we know. Early Christianity was not a monolithic faith. In its first 3 centuries, dozens of Christian communities existed, each with their own texts, their own traditions, their own understanding of what Jesus taught. Some believed in reincarnation, others believed in multiple divine beings, and some believed that Jesus' mission was not to save humanity, but to warn humanity about something that was coming. When the Roman Empire adopted Christianity in the 4th century, it needed a unified doctrine, a single coherent belief system that could be enforced across the empire. The Council of Nicaea in 325 CE and the subsequent councils standardized Christian theology. But standardization required exclusion. Texts that didn't fit were removed. Communities that didn't conform were labeled heretics, and knowledge that contradicted the approved narrative was buried. For 1700 years, that buried knowledge stayed hidden. But technology is a relentless archaeologist. Multispectral imaging, X-ray fluorescence, infrared scanning, these tools don't care about theology. They reveal what's there, regardless of whether institutions want it revealed. And what's being revealed is this: the Bible you know is an edited version. Chapters were removed, texts were suppressed, and the early Christians who preserved these lost chapters believed they contained knowledge that would one day be necessary. Knowledge about who we are, where we came from, and what's waiting beneath the places we've been told not to look. The Vatican has not commented on the restored texts. Most major Christian denominations have declined to address the findings publicly. Scholars who publish work on the subject often find their research marginalized or dismissed. And yet, the work continues. Because once you've seen the erased text, once you've read the verses that were removed, you can't unsee them. You can't unhear the questions they raise. What were the early Christians trying to hide? Or were they trying to preserve something, knowing that one day humanity would need it? And if the lost chapters contain warnings about watchers and seals and doors that shouldn't be opened, what happens now that we're starting to read them again? In ancient apocalyptic literature, there's a recurring theme: knowledge sealed until the end times. The Book of Daniel, the Book of Revelation, the Book of Enoch, all describe visions and prophecies that were sealed until the time of the end. The assumption has always been that this was metaphorical, a literary device. But what if it wasn't? What if early Christians literally hid knowledge, encoded it in texts, erased it from manuscripts, and buried it in deserts and mountains, waiting for a future generation with the technology to recover it? What if the restoration of these lost chapters isn't an accident? What if it's exactly what they intended? And if that's true, then the question isn't what did they hide? The question is, why did they think we'd need it now? 6 lost chapters restored. 6 texts the early church removed. The Gospel of Mark describing watchers who remained. The Dead Sea Scrolls mentioning a second fall. The Apocalypse of Peter warning of seals that bind the depths. Codex Sinaiticus erased and rewritten. annotations referencing chapters removed by council decree, and Mount Ararat hiding something beneath the stone that no one is allowed to excavate. Maybe these texts were removed because they were false. Maybe the early church was protecting believers from heresy. Or maybe they were protecting believers from truth. Truth that didn't fit the narrative of salvation and redemption. Truth about what came before humanity, what fell and what remains, and what happens when the seals finally break. If you made it this far, thank you. Leave a like if this unsettled you. Tell us what you think in the comments. Do you believe the early church hid knowledge for a reason? Or was it simply editing text to fit doctrine? But remember, some books aren't lost by accident. They're hidden on purpose. And when they're finally found, when technology pulls them from the shadows, we might not like what they say, but by then, it's too late to bury them again.